We're thrilled to welcome Trevor Martin, co-founder and CEO of Mammoth Biosciences, to the show today. Thank you once again, Trevor, for joining us. To help host this episode, I'm joined by my colleague, Chen. Let's kick things off. Trevor, can you share a brief intro with us?
Yeah, so my name's Trevor Martin. I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Mammoth Biosciences, along with Jennifer Doudna, Janice, Chen, and Lucas Harrington. And we're building the platform for the next generation of CRISPR products.
Before we dive deep, do you want to provide a little bit more of an intro of Mammoth for us?
Yeah, so Mammoth Biosciences was founded about 4.5 years ago now, spun out of Jennifer Doudna's lab at Berkeley. And the genesis of the company was this idea that there's this whole universe of CRISPR technologies that goes beyond some of the legacy systems like Cas9 or Cas12a. And beyond being very interesting from just an academic perspective, these could also unlock new functionalities, whether that's improved versions of existing products people are building, or that's entirely new product areas that people hadn't even thought about before. So that's a big, ambitious vision. And already at the beginning of the company, we had in our back pocket brand new use of the technology, which was this idea of CRISPR-based diagnostics that people hadn't thought about before and wasn't possible without the kind of new development of these CRISPR technologies. So we started productizing that immediately as we continued to build out this toolbox of CRISPR proteins into what's now become the most diverse toolbox of CRISPR proteins on Earth. Some of the highlights being things like Cas14 and Casφ, that in addition to having this really exciting world of diagnostic applications, we've also pioneered improved therapeutic uses of these, for example, through the ultra small systems as an example that can unlock new ways of doing delivery for in vivo and doing permanent cures.
Thanks for that great overview. To start diving deeper into some of those applications and the technologies, Cage, over to you.
Awesome, thanks, Chris. So you co-founded Mammoth in 2017 at the ripe old age of 28 and brought together a team of co-founders that included Jennifer Doudna to do so. Taking a step back, can you tell us a little bit more about the genesis of Mammoth and what was the spark that convinced you to pursue novel CRISPR systems and CRISPR diagnostics?
Yeah, so I think really from day one, it's very foundationally driven in terms of like new technology can unlock new products that benefit patients. And I think what's exciting coming from a co-founding team that's coming from the scientific background and graduate school is that it really allows you to take that next step towards benefiting patients more directly. Obviously, academia and graduate school can be really fun and exciting in terms of doing deep research and publishing papers, but it can often feel a little bit disconnected from, okay, how is this actually going to have an impact on people and improve their lives? And what's that next step? And it can seem very mysterious and like inscrutable and like something that can't be attained immediately. And I think what's really exciting about startups for all of us is that you really can take that leap and actually say, okay, this is a technology that's coming out of the lab, and we're actually going to translate that all the way to patients, whether that's a diagnostic or a therapeutic or even outside of that in something like agriculture. And I think that's a very powerful concept that's really exciting after you've kind of been in graduate school and like been really focused on the more scientific side. That's a really powerful concept generally.
Yeah, I totally agree. Something that's really important to any startup is the co-founding team. And so I'm curious to hear what brought you together with Janice and Lucas as co-founders, and how do you guys complement each other?
Yeah, so we're a Stanford Berkeley team up actually. So, across the bay. So I don't think graduate students have as much rivalry maybe as undergraduates, but nonetheless, I think really, a big part of it just comes down to really being excited to work with people, right? And I think, co-founding a company is a very long journey. And I think one of the key things is just, do you really feel energized to tackle like the highs, the lows, the in-betweens? I think that's like a very underrated concept. Like, of course, you want to have like matching of like Janice and Lucas and Jennifer obviously have deep CRISPR expertise and are the inventors of these technologies, and have deep knowledge of how to actually develop these systems and have done that in their graduate work and beyond. But I think, beyond all of that, I think the key thing is really just people that you want to work with, because it can be a really long journey. It can be a very tough journey. So I think that that's something that's critical.
Awesome. Again, totally agree with that. And shifting towards kind of a more technical discussion, I think it's safe to say that the development of CRISPR towards its full potential is one of Mammoth's core competencies. And to begin that journey, you began by reimagining diagnostics with the help of CRISPR to create a genetic search engine as a diagnostic platform. Among the challenges CRISPR has the potential to solve, what brought you to diagnostics, and what unmet needs has Mammoth sought to address within diagnostics?
Yeah, so I think starting with diagnostics was definitely an exciting area to start. I think especially because when we were first entering that space, it was definitely maybe underappreciated. I would say this is all pre-pandemic. So anyone in the biotech industry can tell you that if you're having to choose between therapeutics and diagnostics, very few people would give you the advice to start in the diagnostic space. But I think that's an opportunity for like a hungry startup with a new technology that can really make an impact there. So I think it helps maybe that we were a bit naive around what was hot or not in the space necessarily. I mean, we just pursued what we thought would be most impactful at the specific time, right? I mean, I think that's where it can also be extra rewarding. Obviously, the pandemic has accelerated a lot of our work on the diagnostic side in terms of really kind of bringing these technologies closer and closer to patients, even though they're just coming out of the lab relatively recently. And in terms of kind of the specific use cases and everything, I think one of the exciting things about CRISPR-based diagnostics is it really is like a full spectrum technology. So whether it's the lab or it's near patient, doctor's office, or it's even at home, it's a technology that can impact all these different areas. So one of the interesting things about Mammoth is that it's almost like platforms within platforms. We have this most diverse toolbox of CRISPR systems on Earth. We can leverage that in specific application areas, and we do that internally in human therapeutics and human diagnostics. And within diagnostics, there's also a platform, right, with this CRISPR chemistry, and we can apply it in all these sorts of different ways with this North Star of democratizing access to high quality molecular information. But there's many ways that it can be applied over time to do that. So I think that was, even from the beginning of the company, a very powerful concept of you have this like overarching platform and you have specific application areas that you can drive it forward. And then within that, you even have specific application areas where you're building a product. And I think in general, we're big believers that you can prove out the platform with product, right? Like you kind of earn that platform, right, by showing product and actually driving it all the way through and not just sitting back and saying, okay, we have a platform, like please somebody build something with this. And because we really believe in it, right? We think that we can really drive this forward in amazing ways to benefit patients. So.
Awesome. And kind of given the current state of diagnostic products, what are the things that you are most excited by moving forward?
Yeah, so I think the pandemic has obviously catalyzed a lot of interest and innovation in the space. And I think what we're excited about is that we see our CRISPR-based diagnostics as really being a technology that can strike that balance and allow you to have really high quality molecular information in a variety of formats and accessible, right? And it's been kind of this trade-off of like, oh, do you want really high quality molecular information? Well, oh, it's going to come at like an inaccessible price point, or it's going to be something that requires many days to get a result, or you have to go to the lab. Or you can have a very rapid, accessible result, but maybe it's going to have limitations around what you're measuring or the sensitivity and specificity of the result, or maybe how many plex you can do the test, right? Is it a single plex test or is it multiplex? So I think CRISPR-based diagnostics that we're building at Mammoth is very unique in being able to actually solve many of those problems jointly and create something that's just, transformative for this space long-term, not just even during the pandemic, but we really also think about beyond, right? So for the next 10, 15, 20 years, what's something that would have a lot of staying power as we hopefully, beat this pandemic and prepare for the next one and make sure that we don't end up in the same situation.
So while Mammoth started with diagnostics and has had a lot of success in that area, over the past couple of years, you guys have really accelerated forward and expanded your remit. And today it's been said that Mammoth is harnessing the diversity of nature to power the next generation of CRISPR products and to address challenges across healthcare, agriculture, environmental monitoring, biodefense, and more. How does Mammoth harness the diversity of nature, and what unique advantages does this approach have?
Yeah, so I think one of the important things is it really goes back to the foundation of the company and how we've always envisioned this as a platform for a variety of different areas, including diagnostics and therapeutics and beyond. And the reason why we think of it that way is that we've built this toolbox of CRISPR systems, and not just that, but this discovery engine for developing and characterizing novel CRISPR technologies. And that's something that we continue to do and continue to invest more and more in as the company's growing. So it's not even just specific product areas that we're growing the teams and growing investment, but it's also that process of going from, let's say, metagenomic data all the way through to new CRISPR technologies. And that's a huge, I think, competitive advantage for Mammoth, both in the short and the long term. And that means that we can have this big, ambitious vision around what are the product areas we're tackling. And it means that when we're building in specific product areas, we're not constrained. We don't just have, one specific form of technology that we have to use. Maybe it doesn't work at the specific temperature we want or whatever, and we can't modify it. We really do have that flexibility, and we can use the best technology for the job. And I think that is a huge advantage in terms of allowing us to be creative and actually kind of innovate in multiple different areas.
I think that's awesome. And I think that CRISPR has huge applications across a whole variety of industries, but obviously at ALEX, one of the things that we're most interested in is therapeutics. And so can you tell us a little bit more about Mammoth's current development in the therapeutic space?
Yeah, so on the therapeutic side, our North Star is really around this idea of, for example, permanent genetic cures and doing in vivo one-time treatments. And I think as everyone is now kind of talking about, delivery is a huge part of how you actually do that. And whether it's viral or non-viral delivery, one of the things we're excited about is how does this diverse toolbox of CRISPR proteins unlock and open different doors for different delivery techniques, whether that's better leveraging existing techniques like AAV, or that's opening up the door to better cost profiles or better manufacturing profiles. I think that we would like to, really enable this kind of next generation of especially in vivo therapies so that you really can permanently cure disease, right? Which is a very ambitious goal, but that would be transformative for patients compared to anything else out there today. And it's not just delivery. Obviously, there's many other things that you might want to improve on existing technologies, whether that's the targeting range, whether that's maybe things like the immune profile. So I think it all goes back to that idea of you don't just have a hammer and you're just searching for nails, right? Or, you stare at everything till it looks like a nail because that's all you have in your hand. You really do have that, like you have your hammer, you have your screwdriver, you have a wrench, and you can choose the best tool for the job. And in therapeutics, I think that's a very powerful concept because at the end of the day, you're trying to cure a specific disease. So you want to be able to work back from what is the ideal looking CRISPR technology that could go after that? And that also expands into what we call CRISPR plus, right? There's this whole universe now, maybe every month, of these kind of techniques where you're leveraging the CRISPR system as kind of a search engine, and you're combining it with other things like activating or inhibiting or base editing or beyond. And we really see Mammoth as sitting at the center of that universe where, for example, you might want to minimize the size of the CRISPR system so you can actually deliver all of this machinery. And yeah, it really just goes back to the idea of the toolbox.
So you just mentioned kind of the doors that CRISPR opens and how Mammoth is kind of sitting at the center of the many things that CRISPR can do. And so kind of given all of the potential solutions that you guys can start to address, how do you guys identify the problems that you want to solve? And, with the power of the platform you're building, how do you select your problems?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's kind of like the blessing and the curse of platform technologies, right? Is that there's a million things that you can do. So how do you choose the one or two things that you're going to actually focus on? And there, I think that's where we also made a choice early on that we didn't want to be just a licensing shop, right? Like that could have been a strategy for a company like us, is that we don't build product and we, just do licenses or, something similar. And I think in that case, what we were really kind of thinking is a couple of things. So one is that it's extremely motivating for us to directly help patients, right? And we think that we're probably some of the most motivated people on earth to bring these technologies to patients themselves, right? So we have a higher chance of like successfully getting things all the way through because we have a team that understands the technology, invented it, like really understands the pluses and minuses and could help shepherd it through all the way to the finish line. And I think the other thing is that even if you want to do partnerships and stuff, I think there's immense value to proving your platform out and actually showing that you have the faith in it to build products yourself, right? Because I think there's also obviously a lot of financial value tied to that, because it is really hard and it is really difficult and it's a long journey. So I think on that side of things, we made that call early on that we really do want to also be a company that builds product, and that's a core part of what Mammoth is. But this is a huge platform technology, right? So there's kind of two prioritizations. One is what do we want to build internally? And there's still many things we could do there. So we have to narrow the universe and figure out where do we think we have a technology and a market and an execution advantage. And then there's also on the partnership side, right? Like we don't want this technology just to sit on a shelf. We want it to be, because there are thousands and thousands, if not tens of thousands of diseases that this could be used to cure. And that means that you then have to prioritize, okay, you can only do so many partnerships and successfully support them in a certain period of time, depending on how they're structured. So like, what are the ones that you want to go after first? And like, where do you go from there? Are there certain areas where you do a bit more on the licensing side, right? Maybe even outside of healthcare, or do you want to go more of like a wholly owned subsidiary route for something? There's all these different options on top of that, right? Of how you want to structure a partnership. So I'd say there's even like 5 levels of like this kind of prioritization. So what ends up happening is you're just always doing these decisions on priority, right? It's like almost kind of the core part of a platform company is like, are you making those decisions and how?
So what's coming out of these prioritizations? What are, some of the products that you're most interested in, or some of the products that you think are going to be first to market?
Yeah, so we don't have a public pipeline on the therapeutic side right now, but obviously have a lot of internal work that we've done there. In terms of general area though, we're very excited about obviously in vivo applications, right? In terms of like going after permanent cures. In terms of the partnership side, you may have seen that we had some announcements over the last couple of months. We, in late October, announced our partnership with Vertex, 2 indications in the in vivo space. And then more recently, last week, we announced our partnership with Bayer Pharma for 5 in vivo indications, starting with liver. And I think both of those are good examples of how you want to have these partnerships that are advantageous to both parties, right? So in spaces that we think we can have a huge advantage by leveraging these proteins and really, create something that wouldn't be possible otherwise. And working with organizations that have, deep disease expertise, have huge commitment to these fields so that we are jointly committed to like bringing this all the way to the finish line. And yeah, I think on the diagnostic side, we've also had many partnerships over the last few years, whether that's with GSK or DARPA or the NIH. And they're really, again, focused on that spectrum, right, of testing, where this could have applications all the way from the lab to at home. And that's kind of a whole spectrum of products that could be built. So.
And switching tracks a little bit, you've talked a lot about the many potential applications for CRISPR and kind of the desire at Mammoth to build out a lot of these products and a lot of these applications internally, which has resulted in pretty rapid growth of the company. So something we'd love to hear a little more about is how you're hiring and your intentionality when it comes to hiring new people and building the culture at Mammoth.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, definitely the hiring market right now, especially in biotech, is extremely frothy because, there's a lot of capital flowing into biotech startups at the moment as well, which I think is awesome. To be honest. Like, I think that's really great. I think if capital can be allocated anywhere, allocating it in biotech is actually something amazing for society. So I don't think that's an issue at all. I think even more would be better. But a consequence of that is that, yeah, the hiring market is probably one of the toughest that it's been generally for, I don't know, maybe a decade. But I think the advantage of that is that, yeah, if you are very intentional and you try and build a culture that people want to work at, that gives you a huge competitive advantage in that type of market. So I think some of the things that we think about is that obviously, as we're growing, going from like, 10 people to 50 people to now, over 130 people, you actually increasingly have more people that have joined the company for like a short period of time than have been at the company since the very beginning, right? So there's two choices you could make there. One is that whatever culture and like the exact values you set when you were 10 people is what you've run all the way through. And that's a totally fine choice, right? Like that is a perfectly great way to build a company. Or you can say, the company culture is going to change, but I want it to improve and change for the better, right? Like it's going to change and I'm going to embrace that, but I want it to be in a positive direction, not in a negative or a neutral direction. And I think one of the things we've done is we lean more towards the latter, right? We've updated our values over time as we've either used them or not. And we think about the values in terms of like decision making. So when you're making a decision, do you actually use it? Do you violate it? Do you go along with it? And that's a good way of saying, okay, should I discard it or hold on to it? So one example would be like having fun as a company value. So, okay, many times we choose to do things that aren't fun. So if we actually use these for decisions, we just constantly violate it, not because we hate fun necessarily. And sometimes we do choose to do fun things, to be clear, but that's not terribly useful for making decisions. So maybe the right value would instead be reflecting on, okay, why do you choose to do things that are not fun? It's because you care about them and you think they'll have some huge benefit for society. And that was really more of a question of like doing things that you're passionate about and care about, right? So maybe replacing the value related to fun to something more related to passion, right? So you can update these over time. And I think that's really powerful too, because it helps people that are joining the company understand that like they're additive to the company, right? They're not just being fit into some box, but they're actually someone that can influence the company, both in terms of the values, in terms of the products that's being built in a positive way, right? So that's kind of one of the core tenets that we have.
I think that's a great approach to building and maintaining culture, especially in the environment that we're facing right now. So thanks so much for that. I think a lot of people are going to find that very useful. But for now, I'll pass it back to Chris to talk about some major challenges and accomplishments that Mammoth has faced.
Thanks, Gage and Trevor. As I think we all know, launching a company is never an easy feat, especially like you're saying, in such a competitive time and a crowded field. And on top of that, while attracting so much early attention from the media and potential partners. And as you mentioned earlier, you had some recent big announcements with Bayer and with Vertex in the therapeutic space. So when establishing Mammoth, and we touched on this a bit, how did you think about your commercialization strategy? And as the company has grown, do you find it's changed over time?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think one of the important things early on is to recognize, maybe similar to culture, is that things will change over time, but you want them to change in a positive direction. I don't know if there's any startup, I mean, obviously you can go back and like, revise history a bit, that knew exactly like what the business model was going to be, and they just executed that plan for the next 10 years. And that's, there's like a crystal ball. Maybe there's some, I don't know, but I think that's probably the exception, not the rule. So I think what's more important is the thought process behind it, right? Especially in the early stages, is have you thought through why you think a certain commercialization path is the right one? And because that thought process is going to serve you well as you get more data and as you learn more about, okay, like this is the actual right market for the product. Like maybe you thought that, I don't know, just using an example on the diagnostic side, like pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, right? Pandemic clearly has affected people's business plans in diagnostics, right? It would be, kind of impossible not to, right? But that doesn't mean that everyone reacted the same way. So some companies are like, okay, we want to just get product out as quickly as possible because that's, a way to, leverage and help during this time. And that's one strategy. And another strategy is, okay, this is an opportunity to accelerate our development, but not necessarily trying to launch something as quickly as possible, because we want to make sure it's something that lasts for the next 10, 20 years, even in an environment that's very different. And those are both valid choices, but there's something that you couldn't have a crystal ball 2 years before and been like, okay, like that's, necessarily the path you're going to take. So I think in terms of really thinking about commercialization and stuff like that, I think it's more fundamental in terms of like, what type of company do you want to be? Do you want to be a licensing shop? Do you want to be a product company? Because those are choices that can stay with you forever, and you can still change them, right? But those are more fundamental to the DNA, sorry, of the company and the kind of culture you're building even, right? Of like, is it really product focused? Is it more kind of pure licensing focused? So I think those are the bigger questions to ask in the early days.
Makes a lot of sense. And I think you're right. It's something that we all have to continuously reflect on as we try to drive innovation forward. But taking it in a slightly different direction then, what are, over the past few years building Mammoth, what are some of the greatest challenges you face? Pandemic aside, of course.
Yeah, no, I think in general in building a company, I mean, there's just a lot of unknown unknowns, including known unknowns, and et cetera. But in general, I think one of the big things there that actually surprisingly, I think PhD and graduate training can prepare you for is just dealing with the unknowns, because the whole point of a PhD is that you don't know the answer, right? You're going down some path that no one has gone down before, and many paths that don't work, some that do, and just being very resilient to that type of environment. So I think that's something that's incredibly underrated for scientific founders, is the ability to be resilient, to navigate an environment where there are no right answers and there's no textbook and playbook, and you're going to get a lot of different feedback, and it's very unclear what to leverage and what not to leverage, right? Because no one's done it before. So I think that that's a really powerful concept at a high level in terms of just navigating challenges at a startup. I think specifically something that maybe graduate training prepares you less for is managing people, right? Which probably it should be improved, but it's just not like a core part of many schools' curriculums. And that's huge for a startup. Like that's like almost the whole ball game, because really at the end of the day, what is a company? It's a collection of people around some goal. And there's a lot of legal documents around it. And obviously, there's more formalities, but that's the core of it, is people that are all really excited about achieving a joint goal over time, potentially a lot of time and requiring a lot of money. So I think a key thing, especially for a scientist kind of going to the startup world, is kind of embracing that and embracing this idea of kind of collaboration where there's not like a zero-sum game. It's not like there's a first author and a last author and you're battling. No, everyone wins or everyone loses together. And that's a really liberating and powerful concept, I think. So that's kind of another high level one. And yeah, I think just more generally, the number one thing is just recruiting people to the vision, right? And to the company you're trying to build. And especially in the early days where there's not many proof points, and it's like, like there's 100, especially today, hundreds of options for anyone. And you really have to help them understand why you're especially excited about what you're trying to accomplish and why it could succeed, right? Assume success. And if things do succeed, how is that really transformative and exciting for patients and for someone to join you on that journey? So I think those are things that are maybe less prepared for in graduate school that are critical to the journey.
I think you shared a lot of really good insight there and really summarized some of the challenges surrounding working with other people and transitioning from an N of one or an N of a few in a lab to building a company around an idea. And I think that's something that, as you sort of navigate those challenges, our audience would love to hear a little bit more about what are the takeaway lessons you've learned. How do you do that well and make sure you really are bringing those people together and bringing them forward with you?
Yeah, no, I think there's probably many successful strategies here, which is great, right? But I think what I've leaned towards is really always trying to be with people that are smarter than me and hire people smarter than me and work with people smarter than me. I think other people take the track maybe more Steve Jobs-esque of like, micromanage and like, yeah, you just know exactly what everything's going to look like all the time and just kind of smartest person in the room maybe. But yeah, I think it's actually a very powerful concept to be more on the side of, yeah, like you don't know everything. And there's a lot of really smart people in the world who have been super deep on different areas. And even if you read a bunch of books in a month or whatever, you're not going to match the decades and decades of experience. So instead of trying, and obviously, you need to put in the work and like do a lot of that as well. But I think it's, really exciting also just to bring people into the company that have way more experience and, way more depth on these specific areas so that you can learn from them and you can empower them to, help you achieve this vision. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways for me is, that's a very powerful culture, I think, and a really exciting culture for people to work in, is one where, their talents are celebrated and leveraged and empowered. And I think that's a way for a company to scale as well over time, right? Especially as the company gets larger and larger. You can't be as much of like an individual contributor in every area. And you shouldn't be, right? Because there are people that have really deep expertise that could 10x the company.
Changing tracks slightly, we'd love to hear in your own words, what would you say have been some of Mammoth's biggest triumphs over the past few years?
Yeah, I think number one is the team. To that point, right? Like at the end of the day, a company is the collection of people. So whether that's, the team internally from, the very first hire to the most recent hire and beyond, or that's the external team, right? Like the board that we built up and the investor base. It's like, it's really all together and everything has to function aligned to be able to allow a company to really succeed. So I think maybe one thing people overlook is also its internal and external team building and like advisors and mentors and, everything that comes along with that. So I'd say that'd be the number one thing. I think number two, the advances we've made on the technology, right? And that's been validated now by, the partnerships that we've been able to form, by the papers that we've put out as the company's grown. And, of course, many things, unfortunately, we can't say, so they're not public yet. But, that's incredibly rewarding to see a technology that was in the lab get closer and closer and closer to patients in a variety of different ways. That's really hard to beat. And I think that's a big attraction of startups generally, right? It's that you see that translation very rapidly. And yeah, I think those are some of the key ones. And I think the key ones going forward are going to be as we really see it translate to patients more and more, right? Whether that's therapeutics or diagnostics. That's just really hard to beat, right? is being a part of translating something from the lab to and the bench to patients themselves. And then, yeah, of course, along the way, there's, many kind of milestones that you want to celebrate around like financings and stuff like that, but those are all fuel for the fire and they should be celebrated. I think people overlook that, right? Like the startups are hard journeys, so you want to celebrate your wins so that you can take a step back. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's really the technological progress that is going to build the long-term company, and the team is responsible for that. So
it sounds like an incredibly positive culture, and as you say, I think we're all excited to see the benefit brought to patients. But to keep talking about that future, Cage.
Yeah, so Trevor, it's been great talking to you about where Mammoth is today and learning a little bit about how they got there. But I think we can all agree that we're only just starting to scratch the surface of what CRISPR is capable of. So we'd love to hear a little bit about what is coming next for Mammoth.
Yeah, no, I think that's the exciting thing about this space is that even though there's been a ton of progress and it already feels exponential, I think we're still just at that beginning inflection point, and there's still just so much exciting progress to come. That's always a really fun place to be, an impactful place to be. So I think taking a step back, one of the things that Mammoth is that we really think about CRISPR as this kind of programmable search engine for biology, right? And it's this way of programmatically interacting with biology and turning biology more into something that you can actually engineer and you can actually design, like, exciting ways of interacting with it in a reproducible way. And that has obvious applications in therapeutics and diagnostics, but even beyond, right? You know, in other fields like biomanufacturing or agriculture, et cetera. And I think at Mammoth, what's really cool is that we have an opportunity to drive forward kind of the next generation of this innovation and the next generation, the next generation, right? And I think one of the things that's important to us is as we continue to really invest deeply in product, right? And actually specific diseases that we want to cure and building diagnostic tests and launching them. I think a key thing that we are trying to be very conscious about is how do we make sure that we constantly are innovating, right? And we're not sacrificing our love for discovery and innovation and creativity, because that's a classic trade-off as well. Is like as you go deeper on product, you start to focus less on innovation. And I think that's a very powerful concept for building a long-lasting company. And I think that's where the platform concept is very powerful as well, because it kind of forces you to invest in both of those areas because they feed each other. They're not robbing each other, right? Like as you invest more into the platform, you have more and more opportunities to build amazing products and to improve on them and to like launch Gen 2 of it. So I think that that's where we really long-term embrace this platform idea. And that allows us to always stay at the forefront of both the technology of CRISPR and beyond itself, and stay at the cutting edge of building product. And that's a really unique environment that you can't find elsewhere, is being at the very tip of the spear of research and also being at the tip of the spear of application. And I think that can attract people that are just really excited about the translation.
Awesome. So taking a step back from your role at Mammoth, what are your thoughts on the future of CRISPR and where do you think it's going to be 10 or 20 years from now?
Yeah, I think hopefully similar to how now it's almost weird to say computational biology, right? Because we use computational tools throughout. Whereas, maybe 10, 15 years ago, like it felt like more of a subfield. I think my hope would be over the next 10, 20 years, we really become more able to engineer across the whole spectrum of biology using the CRISPR tools, whether that's, to tackle more exciting research problems or to cure diseases or to build diagnostics or to build better plants to feed another 10 billion people on the planet. I think that hopefully it almost feels weird to say synthetic biology because it's like, oh, well, of course, all biology is engineering. That's part of the discipline along with being computational. And I think that will be a sign of success for the field and for the type of products that Mammoth is building if, it's really just a core part of biology itself.
Awesome. And are there any applications that people are working on or innovations that you think are going to come out of the pipeline over the next 10 years that you're particularly excited by?
Yeah, I think obviously at Mammoth, we're especially excited about diagnostic and therapeutic applications. And I think there really is those North Stars of being able to permanently cure a disease with a one-time treatment, right? Like that would be transformative for many, many, many diseases and for patient quality of life generally. And then on the diagnostic side, like really being able to have something in the comfort of your home that gives you as high, if not higher quality result than what you get in the lab, and that being able to actually take action on, right? So you have some symptom like, oh, you're sneezing or you have a sore throat, and you actually not only learn that you don't have something, but you learn you have something, right? So it's giving you actionable information, and then that allows you to very directly connect with a therapeutic, right? Or even longer term, you can even imagine both diagnosing and curing a disease with CRISPR, right? Just coming full circle. And yeah, I think that's really the long-term promise of engineering biology, is being able to have that entire loop of technologies and yeah, just bring that to patients as quickly as we can.
No, I totally agree. And I think it's going to be a very exciting space to watch over the next couple of years. But, thank you so much for telling us more about Mammoth and expanding our horizons about what's going on in the CRISPR space. And I'll pass it back to Chris for some closing thoughts.
Thanks, Gage. So, Trevor, as you talked about, you came to entrepreneurship pretty early in your career. And at this stage, it seems like you've been incredibly thoughtful and intentional about the way you've brought some of the learnings and takeaways from academia, but also built and expanded beyond them. Is there anything else you try to think about, or any sort of advice you'd share for future founders looking to build the next big breakout in biotech?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big one is that hopefully as companies like Mammoth continue to develop and, bring exciting new technologies to patients, it shows that that's a path that you can walk down in other companies as well. Because I think that's a very powerful concept. And I think it's one of the secrets of kind of Silicon Valley is, not that there's necessarily something in the water, but there's just, you have peers that you have backgrounds similar to you that have done these things. And I think that's a very powerful concept that can unlock that door in your mind. And obviously we see it a lot more on the software side now, but I hope going forward, also in biotech, whether that's masters or graduate students or postdocs or professors or whoever, there's just more and more examples of success of kind of making that transition from academia to the startup world and, for society's benefit. And I think that would be really exciting for the world at large, is to have more people that are translating these technologies who actually invented them and built them to patients, because I think that will increase the chances of success, hopefully.
Yeah. And as we try to encourage that transition and that growth and success, do you have any thoughts on how the academic system could try and maybe change, evolve, grow, develop to facilitate that sort of success?
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be very symbiotic. I don't think it has to be like a battle or anything like that. I think it can be quite complementary, where universities and academic systems could help people understand this path more and educate them, and even support people on the early stages of that journey when it's the most difficult, right? And just help people understand that it's not just academia or industry. I guess it's a form of industry, but a little bit different in terms of being able to drive things forward in the direction that you want. And yeah, I think that could be really powerful in terms of recruiting the best students and really giving them all the optionality in terms of pursuing the path that they want to go down. Yeah, I think many universities are already doing this to great effect. So.
And as you're saying, I think there's going to be a great entrepreneurial boom. We're already seeing the start of it with founders and companies like yourselves. And so I'm excited to see what's coming next. But as we start to wrap up here, and thank you so much, any other closing thoughts you'd like to share with our audience?
No, I think the main one is just that, startups are definitely risky endeavors, and, they can be really high highs and really low lows and everything in between. But definitely it is a journey that can be extremely rewarding. So people should definitely seriously consider it as a path that they can go down, and not kind of shut the door on themselves necessarily because it's like, oh, I can't possibly do that. Because I think that could have a huge benefit long-term for the world, the more people really think about how they can translate technologies to benefit people. And what's exciting is we live in a time where there is capital available to do that, and people are willing to take that risk as well on the other end, right? That's not always the case. So I think it's on us to show that that risk is worth it, that, this is something that can benefit society. And, of course, there's financial benefits that allow people to reinvest into the next wave of companies and see even more progress in terms of curing disease and diagnosing disease. Because, yeah, I think if there's any place that capital can be allocated, I think biotech and engineering biology and just, enabling us to live better lives is the best possible place it can be. So.
I think all of us will agree with you on that. And I look forward to that future continuing to develop. How can our audience learn more about your work?
So our website is mammoth.bio, and you can find me on Twitter at @MartinTrevor_.
All right. Well, thank you, Trevor, again for an absolutely fantastic episode. We're very grateful for your time and can't wait to see where Mammoth goes next. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.